There are some experiments in psychology that don't just feel strange. They feel wrong. Behind the calm language of science, behind the white coats and research papers, there were moments when human beings were pushed too far. Children were frightened on purpose. People were manipulated. Trust was broken. And in the name of understanding the human mind, researchers sometimes revealed just how terrifying that mind can become. These were not myths, not horror stories. They actually happened. Tonight we are stepping into the dark side of psychology, where curiosity turned cold, ethics were ignored, and the results left a permanent shadow on science. Let's begin. 1. The little Albert experiment. Imagine a child sitting calmly in a room. A white rat is placed in front of him. At first, there is no fear, no panic, just curiosity. But then, every time the rat appears, a violent, frightening sound explodes in the room, again and again. And slowly something horrifying happens. The child begins to cry, not because of the noise, but because of the rat itself. This was the little Albert experiment. It proved that fear can be taught, conditioned, manufactured, and that is what makes it so disturbing. A child who once felt nothing was turned into a child who was afraid of something harmless. That is not just psychology. That is the creation of fear. 2. Milgram's obedience experiment. Now picture this. A person sits in a room. In front of him is a machine with switches. He is told to press them when another person answers incorrectly. The shocks seem to get stronger. The screams become more intense. The hesitation becomes visible. And yet, many still continue. That was the Milgram experiment. People were willing to believe that obeying authority mattered more than their own conscience. Even when they thought they were hurting someone, they kept going. And that is the terrifying truth of this experiment. Sometimes people do not need to be cruel. They only need to be told to be. 3. The Stanford prison experiment. Take a group of ordinary students. Put them in a fake prison. Give some the role of guards. Give others the role of prisoners. At first, it looks like a harmless simulation. Then the darkness begins. The guards become abusive. The prisoners become broken, anxious, and powerless. The line between acting and becoming disappears. That was the Stanford prison experiment. It showed how quickly power can corrupt the human mind, how fast domination can become cruelty, how easily a normal person can begin to enjoy control over another human being. And the scariest part, it did not feel like a game for very long. 4. Harlow's monkey experiments. A baby monkey reaches out, not for food, but for comfort. That was the discovery at the heart of Harlow's experiments. The monkeys were separated from their mothers and forced to bond with artificial substitutes. What the researchers found was unsettling. Emotional warmth was not optional. It was essential. But the cost was painful. The animals suffered. They were isolated, distressed, and emotionally damaged. This experiment showed that love, touch, and comfort are not luxuries. They are survival. And without them, even the smallest mind can begin to unravel. 5. The Rosenhan experiment. What if a healthy person walked into a psychiatric hospital and was treated like a mentally ill patient? That is exactly what happened in the Rosenhan experiment. Healthy volunteers claimed to hear voices. Once admitted, they behaved normally. But the system kept seeing illness where there was none. Even ordinary actions were interpreted through the lens of diagnosis. That is the nightmare hidden inside this experiment. Not only can labels shape perception, they can trap a person inside a story that is not true. It exposed how fragile judgment can be, especially when institutions are certain they are right. 6. The monster study. Now imagine children, already vulnerable, already fragile, being told over and over that something is wrong with their speech. Not gently, not to help them, but to study the effect of criticism. That was the monster study. Children in an orphanage were subjected to harsh, negative feedback, and the emotional damage was real. Some developed speech problems. Some lost confidence. Some carried the harm long after the experiment ended. It was called the monster study for a reason, because when science forgets compassion, it stops being science and becomes something much darker. 7. Learned helplessness experiments. Imagine being trapped in pain, again and again, with no way out. At some point, you stop fighting. You stop trying. You stop believing escape is possible. That is the idea behind learned helplessness. These experiments showed that when a living being repeatedly experiences failure or punishment without control, it can begin to give up entirely. And that discovery became important in understanding trauma and depression in humans. But the concept itself is chilling, because it suggests that hopelessness is not always born. Sometimes it is trained. 8. The blue eyes/brown eyes experiment, a classroom, a teacher, a simple division. One group is told they are better. Another is told they are lesser. And almost instantly the atmosphere changes. Confidence collapses. Arrogance grows. Children begin to act according to the label they were given. This was Jane Elliott's experiment on prejudice and discrimination. It was meant to teach an important lesson, but what it revealed was disturbing. How quickly bias can take root. How fast children can absorb cruelty. How deeply identity can be shaped by nothing more than how others look at you. 9. The case of David Reimer. Some stories in psychology are not experiments in the traditional sense. They are tragedies. The case of David Reimer is one of them. After a medical accident, his life was altered in ways that would shape his identity, development, and future in devastating ways. What followed became one of the most painful examples of how forced intervention can destroy a life. This case is remembered because it changed the conversation around identity, development, and the limits of psychological control. But behind the textbooks is a human being, and a life that was deeply affected. That is what makes it so haunting. 10. MK Ultra. Now we enter one of the darkest chapters in modern history, MK Ultra, a secret CIA program. Mind control experiments, drugs, hypnosis, manipulation, psychological testing done in the shadows. The idea was simple and terrifying. Can the human mind be controlled? For years, much of it remained hidden. And when the truth emerged, it sounded less like history and more like a nightmare. Because the fear was not in what people imagined. The fear was in what had actually been done. 11. Sensory deprivation experiments. Now imagine silence so complete it becomes unbearable. No light, no sound, no stimulation. Just your own mind, turning inward. At first it may seem peaceful, but after a while the brain begins to fight back. Anxiety rises. Time loses meaning. Hallucinations can begin. These sensory deprivation experiments showed how deeply the human mind depends on the world around it. Remove everything, and the mind may start creating its own terror. 12. The third wave experiment, Classroom becomes a movement becomes a system, and before long the system begins to control the people inside it. That was the third wave. A teacher created an authoritarian environment to show how easily people can be absorbed into group obedience. Discipline became obsession. Loyalty became pressure. Identity became conformity. And what made it so terrifying was how fast it happened. Because no matter how intelligent people think they are, the need to belong can become stronger than the need to think. Outro, these experiments helped shape psychology as a science. But they also revealed something ugly, that human beings can be manipulated. That power can become cruelty. That authority can silence conscience. And that the mind, for all its strength, can also be frighteningly vulnerable. Science can explain behavior, but when ethics are ignored, science can become a weapon. And maybe that is the darkest lesson of all. The most terrifying thing in these experiments was not the machines, the prisons, the silence, or the fear. It was us.